Okay, I'm going to start now. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for being here today. Today we are going to have a Vermont Q&A and learn about how there are state level grants out there to food hubs to deliver local food for schools. My name is Cassandra Bull. I'm a policy specialist with the National Farm to School Network and your Q&A organizer and host for today. And this session was brought to you as a collaboration between the National Farm to School Network and the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems. I am honored to share space with some great food systems professionals from Vermont. We have Gina Clitheroe of Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Next, we have Becca Perrin of Green Mountain Farm Direct, Tom Bruton and Patrick Ackerman-Hovis of Food Connects. And then for the Q&A portion, we have Tracy Weatherhog from Vermont Farmers Food Center. So our agenda today, I'm currently giving an introduction and have a few more slides just to set the table. Then we'll have presentations from the folks I just mentioned. And then we're going to have a pretty robust Q&A portion where I'm hoping you all who might be interested in starting these programs in your areas can ask nitty-gritty questions only the folks here in this room can answer. So really excited for that. And you can enter your questions during the chat throughout the presentation, and I'll read them off at the end. So just setting the stage a little bit, the program we're talking about is funded by the USDA Local Food for Schools Cooperative Agreement program, which was launched 2 years ago in the spring of 2022. It's a one-time infusion of federal funds, and it's a COVID-19 relief era program. The overall budget was $200 million, and basically the USDA engaged in cooperative agreement programs with state agencies. These were non-competitive, and really the money was for local, unprocessed, or minimally processed food, with the priority for purchases from socially disadvantaged, what the USDA calls farmers and ranchers and small businesses. And so there's a slew of other federal relief programs, which we're not going to talk about, but just for context, they include Local Food Purchasing Assistance Program, Farm to School State Formula Grants, Supply Chain Assistance Funds, and many others, I'm sure. And so why we're here today, why this is so interesting, is because LFS basically is a local food purchasing incentive program, right? Funded at the federal level. And there are state level funded permanent programs that are local food purchasing incentives. And on the left, this graphic, you'll see typically the structure is this way, where state agencies give money to child nutrition programs if they do, or so that they can purchase local food from farmers, producers, hubs, and distributors. So all of the permanent state level programs work that way. And a vast majority of LFS designs sort of have that model. But Vermont has what I'm calling a farmer-focused incentive model, where state agencies will award funding to local farmers, producers, hubs, and distributors, and then they will then give local food to child nutrition programs. So it's pretty unique. There's at least 6 states that are using this design for LFS. And it is also pretty common with the other federal assistance program, the Local Food Purchasing Assistance Cooperative Agreement. And so I think that there are a lot of benefits to this model. I'm not going to go into them right now. And I'm hoping that the lessons learned from folks, practitioners on the ground in Vermont can give fodder, can back up this program a little bit more for people that are looking to implement a similar program in their area. So that's all I have to share. I'm now going to pass the mic over to Gina, who will talk about what this looks like in Vermont.
Thanks so much, Cassandra. So hi all, I'm Gina Clitheroe, she, her pronouns. I'm with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I'm our Farm to Institution Program Manager. And I'm here to kind of offer an overview of the Vermont Local Food for Schools program. So in 2022, the Agency of Ag received a grant from USDA for Local Food for Schools. and that grant totaled $333,763. Between 2022 and 2023, the agency worked with the Agency of Education and 4 food hubs to plan, develop, and implement this program. And the Vermont LFS program launched in September and will end in June of 2024. Next slide. So at a high level, these are the kind of components of the Vermont LFS program. So the Agency of Agriculture allocated the LFS funds that we received from USDA equally to all school food authorities in Vermont. And then the agency assigned each school food authority to work with a local food hub. And those food hubs set aside each SFA's allocation of LFS funds as a form of credit that can be used to purchase LFS eligible food. So essentially, every single SFA in Vermont has access to free local food through their food hub through this program. So starting when the program launched in September of 2023, the agency and food hubs conducted outreach to school food authorities about the existence of these funds. And the food hubs have been onboarding SFAs as new food hub customers to access these funds. And food hubs have also helped SFAs understand what products in the catalog are eligible. So the SFAs then, their experience is that they just order local food from their assigned food hub and they receive that at no charge. The Agency of Ag then reimburses each food hub for those purchases. So that's kind of the overview of how it works, but I'll get into a little bit more detail as we go through. Next slide. So to start, we were allocating LFS funds equally to every SFA in Vermont. And so there are 69 school food authorities or SFAs in Vermont that use the National School Lunch Program. So using enrollment data from the Vermont Agency of Education, we developed an enrollment-based formula to calculate how much LFS funding of this grant that we received would be assigned to each SFA. Every SFA received a base funding allocation of $1,000. And then there was this enrollment-based calculation on top of that. And that was because there was an understanding that if an SFA was receiving less than $1,000, it might just be more effort than it's worth to get up to speed with this whole new program. So within each SFA, there are usually multiple schools. And so we asked SFAs when we notified them of this program to distribute those funds as equitably as possible within the schools in their system rather than one school utilizing all of the funds allocated to that SFA. Next slide. So here we have the map of, so each of those blue dots on the map represents a school food authority in Vermont. And then we have the location of the food hubs. So this slide helps illustrate it kind of marks a moment in the process where we had to go through the process of assigning each school food authority with a food hub in their neighborhood. So this was a process that involved lots of engagement with the food hub partners that are on this call and also Acorn Food Hub that's not presenting on this call. But did just want to mention when it came to food hub selection here, Food Connects and Green Mountain Farm Direct had been delivering to foods to SFAs, mostly Green Mountain Farm Direct. As you'll see up here is in the northern portion of the state. Food Connects was kind of covering a lot of southern Vermont up to central Vermont. And then Acorn Food Hub and Vermont Farmers Food Center are both the newer food hubs that have opened in the last few years and started developing relationships with schools. So there was a unique opportunity with this grant program to, with the powers combined of all 4 of these food hubs, we were able to reach every single school food authority statewide, which we couldn't have done without the engagement of every single one of those food hubs. And there was a lot of collaboration that went into deciding which food hubs were going to take on which SFAs. Lots of conversations, especially I remember with Tom and Becca about some of these overlapping areas in central Vermont that both food hubs serviced. And there was consideration around route planning and also any prior relationships that food hubs had with customers in these areas. And then other factors as well were staff capacity to take on new customers. But yeah, statewide, able to reach all 69 SFAs because of this network of support. Next slide. So this slide is just meant to kind of illustrate the flow of money through the grant, through this program. So the USDA awarded the agency this funding, and the agency then distributed these funds in the form of subaward agreements to 4 food hubs. And you'll see here at the bottom of the screen that we have the amount that was awarded to each food hub and the number of SFAs that they were assigned based on their location in the state. And in the next slide, I can get into more detail on those subaward agreements, but just want to illustrate that, yeah, so if you add up all the numbers on the bottom of the screen, that adds to the total grant that we got from USDA, and the number of SFAs adds up to 69. So this is covering every single SFA with those funds. Next slide. So getting into some of the details from these subaward agreements, the 100% of the Local Food for Schools funds that the agency awarded to the food hub are passed on directly to the SFAs as credit from the food hub. So there's no admin overhead going to the food hubs or going to the agency for managing these funds. Also want to note that part of some of the conditions that were associated with these grant agreements to kind of outline and give an overview of what the scope of work was for the food hubs. So the food hubs are tasked with conducting outreach and technical assistance to help SFAs utilize their LFS allocations. Food hubs are aggregating, storing, and delivering local food for schools at no cost to those schools. And the food hubs are also tracking their work, tracking what counts as local food for schools eligible, and submitting quarterly and annual reports to the agency. And some of those key metrics are included here. The food hubs submit monthly invoices to the agency to reimburse for those LFS sales. And I guess one other that I didn't put on here that I just want to flag, as well as one of the conditions of the subaward agreements, are also that food hubs are targeting sales to socially disadvantaged and small businesses. Next slide. So some of the impact that we have to date across the 4 different food hub programs are on a quantitative side. Our most recent report to USDA was from the last quarter of 2023. So these are numbers from that report. At that time, there was SFAs had spent a total of 111,000 of the 333,000 allocation. Over half of Vermont's SFAs have received some amount of local food from this program, which is really exciting. And 117 local producers have benefited, of which 58 meet the USDA definition of socially disadvantaged producers. Some of the positive stories that we're hearing, and there's probably a lot more that we just aren't reaching out and asking for these stories, but what I've heard, at least so far, that I just wanted to highlight is we're hearing about schools that haven't bought any local food before that are participating in this program. We've heard from food service directors that they appreciate that there's minimal reporting required for them to engage in this local food program. And we've also heard that food service directors have expressed interest in continuing to work with the food hub that they were assigned to, even after they have drawn down all of their LFS funding and therefore gone through their free portion of food and are now willing to pay for the high quality local food that they're getting from their local food hub. And I just want to flag as well that all 4 of the food hub partners are just doing amazing work, building new relationships and tackling different challenges that are arising in each region. So those are exciting impacts to date. Next slide. We wanted to offer up some context as to what the existing conditions were in Vermont that made this program possible and really successful. And a lot of this is around the relationships and the networks. So the two that I wanted to call out are the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network, which is our statewide farm to school network. There was a lot of conversation and engagement within the network on this program, especially pulling in the Agency of Education, the Agency of Agriculture, food hubs, NOFA Vermont. These were all key players in designing and launching this program. And also the Vermont Food Hub Collaborative, which is a network of food hubs in Vermont. There had been some pre-existing relationships that Becca and Tom could speak to further using Center for an Agricultural Economy around like some different, I'm not sure if I have all the technical terms at my fingertips here, but there were pre-existing kind of arrangements for sharing space and trucks and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of those logistics around how do we reach every person in the state were maximized by some of those already set up agreements. And the other things that made this possible is that we happen to have food hubs that are able to reach statewide or we're close enough to stretch within their capacity. I know that's not the case in every state. And then also just utilizing food hubs as a key partner in this. One of the benefits of that is that food hubs are mission-driven organizations and they're willing and able to dedicate staff time to source identify their products to determine if the products are LFS eligible, which is not a straightforward process. We have come to find. And also generating lists or categories of LFS eligible products within their product catalog for ordering. And then another is just the commitment to partnership. I think with any new program that you're launching, there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of creativity. And I think this group has been really great at staying in touch and staying flexible and finding out ways to make it happen. So that's, oh yeah, next slide, there's a little bit more. So did just want to flag as well the connection between this one-time federally funded LFS program and the ongoing state-funded local foods incentive grant. So this is a grant that's managed by the Vermont Agency of Education, and that grant program reimburses school food authorities for certain cents per meal when the SFA spends at least 15 to 25% of their budget on Vermont local food. One thing that we just want to flag in regards to that definition is that the definition of local for the local foods incentive grant is Vermont specific, and there's more information online about it, but it's Vermont specific, whereas the USDA LFS definition includes regional products and then also has some other limitations, specifically around minimally processed foods. So there are different definitions. So there's food that counts for the LFS program that does not count for the LFI. And LFS purchases that do count as Vermont local, which can't, the LFS bucket is in some ways broader than the LFI bucket because it includes these regional products. And so there are some LFS products that, if purchased, the SFAs are able to count those purchases towards their application for a local foods incentive grant. And so one of the goals of the LFS program is to ultimately increase participation and eligibility for the LFI going forward. But not every purchase with LFS funds will be able to be counted towards the LFI. But that's also one of the strengths of this, is that because the Vermont specific definition is a bit Vermont specific. You know, there are a lot of schools that are right on the border to New Hampshire, for example, that want to be able to support what is local to them, which currently with our state local foods incentive grant, they're not able to do. But the LFS program did support some of those regional purchases. Next slide. I think this is my last one, or second to last. So some of the successes that we've seen so far are that SFAs are ordering local food from a food hub for the first time. And it seems likely that many of these SFAs will continue working with their assigned food hub even after their LFS funds have been spent. So that's something we're really excited about with this program, is building those new connections. Obviously, buying local from the food hub is not the only way that schools can buy local food, but it's a really important option. And so it's exciting to be opening the door for all these schools into being able to source from a food hub, in addition to hopefully having some direct connections with farmers in their area and other methods, working with broadline distributors, etc. And another thing that's great about this program is that it's making local food purchasing accessible to SFAs that haven't yet engaged with other state farm to school grant programs. And so it complements these programs that require more effort and time commitment from the school, such as the Local Foods Incentive Grant, and also the grant programs that I manage with the Agency of Agriculture, which are our farm to school and early childhood grant programs. We're seeing intensive engagement from a smaller number of schools and school food authorities every year. And incredible impacts are happening that are lasting year over year, but it's also really exciting to be able to offer an entry point to local food purchasing and an entry point to farm to school to every single SFA in Vermont, and really broaden the reach of these programs. And I'm just going to flag some of these challenges, and Tom and Becca and Tracy, as they have actually been in the weeds implementing the program, are going to be able to offer a little bit more insight into the specifics. But at a high level, some of the challenges that we have encountered have been challenges for SFAs that have contracted food service management companies have had a harder time accessing the program due to some of the limitations around the way that those contracts are written. There's been a high administrative burden for managing this program for the food hubs. And then also just want to flag as well that once you take in Vermont, not a super large amount of funding comparatively to what some other states received for LFS funds, $330,000. You split that up amongst the SFAs and you're only getting $1,000 to $13,000, which is kind of a drop in the bucket in some regards for a school food budget, depending on the size of the school. And also you have SFAs that have multiple schools within them. So that's one of the limitations, is that it's maybe not the biggest impact, and it's only available one time, but it's opening the door and hopefully creating these long-term relationships and bringing new folks into the fold. So successes and challenges, that's my take on it, but I'm really excited to hear Becca and Tom present later on to get more into detail with that. Next slide. And then I just wanted to throw up here, if you want to learn more about the Local Food for Schools program in Vermont, or the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant programs that the Agency of Agriculture manages, feel free to go to agriculture.vermont.gov/farm to school. And my contact information is there as well. I'm happy to throw it in the chat at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina, for that great overview. Next, we are going to hear from some Food Hub partners. So I think we're going to hear from Tom and Patrick, who will talk about their experience implementing this program that Gina just described.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Bruton. I work at Food Connects. My role is institutional sales specialist.
And my name is Patrick Ackman-Hovis. I'm Farm to School Sales Coordinator here at Food Connects.
So Food Connects was one of the 4 food hubs that were responsible for working with the Agency of Ag to implement the Local Food for Schools program in Vermont. And so just a bit about Food Connects. We're a nonprofit that provides farm-to-school coaching services in southern Vermont and distributes 100% source-identified food to more than 60 schools throughout Vermont, New Hampshire, and Western Mass. And for this program, we were assigned 34 SFAs, 10 of which were already existing customers. And then we had to onboard 20 new customers. So regards to the funding, in total, we were responsible for $166,000 of the LFS funds. And to date, more than $100,000 of these funds have already been used as a line of credit from the SFAs that we've partnered with. And we've been able to positively impact and sell from over 20 socially disadvantaged farms that are in our portfolio. Next slide.
So as you can see, the screenshot is showing this checkbox for local food for schools. So as we were onboarding SFAs, we would let them know to select this eligibility flag to identify items. On the next slide, you can see another change we are making in our system was to highlight the items that are eligible on the invoice, and the invoice also reflects what credit was applied on that invoice. In some cases, there was an amount due if non-LFS eligible items were selected, and this was an education process. There were times that items were selected that were not eligible, but it was a loop. We were able to feedback to the customer and make adjustments as needed. Next slide, please. And in this process, we were engaged with that outreach to each school food authority and identifying who that contact was and deciding how they wanted to allocate the credits to their school. So in some cases, there was one drop point, but we may have a couple of schools and we're able to allocate the funds separately. They can manage that. Or it was kept as a single pot, maybe one drop, and they were distributing it among their schools. We were also applying these credits each day following our order delivery cycle. So an invoice would be received that we showed, and it would reflect those credits directly on the invoice. And again, we were reporting to the SFAs as they were getting towards the end of their LFS allocations. And then, as Gina said, we're providing quarterly updates. And that's reflecting what the expenditures are, the totals, and the amounts that were going towards socially disadvantaged and small businesses. And this update was great because it helps us track as we're progressing through and target SFAs and make really plans to spend down those funds so that it ends at June and the funds have been used well for local foods.
Great. Next slide. So just for some of the successes that Food Connects has seen, first and most importantly, we've onboarded 20 new districts. That has been just a huge success and a huge bolster in our sales. Another success is that the paperwork for this program did not fall on the food service director. It fell on us as the food hubs. And so, many food service directors are strapped for time, and by us taking on this administrative lift, it really just incentivized the schools to see the benefit of the program and just take advantage of it pretty easily. Another success is the interconnection with the Local Foods Incentive Grant, or the LFI. And so for this piece, there were Vermont local products that we strongly encouraged the SFAs to purchase using their local Food for Schools funds because they were eligible for the LFI grant, essentially like a double dip situation. So that was our primary strategy, to increase our chances of retaining customers once LF funds have been drawn down. And that's been the case. So there have been SFAs that have used the LFS funds entirely, and we've already received commitments from those schools that they are going to purchase year-long commitments of local Vermont beef, as an example. And just another success too is the creative use of the funds. So there have been some SFAs that have really just tried to expand their menus by offering local kimchi or curds from a 5-generation creamery in a local farmstead in Vermont. So it's just been really exciting to see the diversity of how schools have used the products. Next. As far as challenges go, there have been some challenges with just the transportation piece. So in the beginning, as we were looking to assign food hubs to the SFAs, we had kind of just one single address per SFA, and that didn't always align with like the desired drop location for that district. So that kind of proved a challenge with transportation. Another challenge was identifying decision makers at the SFA level. There's often one person who is responsible for determining how those funds should be equitably distributed across the district. And then there was also a buyer who would be purchasing the food. So it's just tough to wrangle all the people to figure out, to summarize the program and to get it rolling. And lastly, another challenge was the administration time required for food hubs. So this is kind of a pro and a con. We definitely see this as a benefit that it removed the administrative burden from the SFAs to document and report this program, but it also did require more work on the food hubs. Next slide. When it comes to areas of improvement, so we suggest that a portion of funds are set aside for administrative time, for food hubs specifically, and also that the same definition of local could be used for these multiple state programs that we've been talking about, the Local Food for Schools and the Local Foods Incentive Grant. So that pretty much wraps up our section, and I'll pass it off to Becca to discuss her thoughts.
Hi, everyone. I'm Becca from the Green Mountain Farm Direct Food Hub. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So a little bit about Green Mountain Farm Direct. We are a program of a larger nonprofit called Green Mountain Farm to School that also offers farm to school educational programming as well as food access programming. So our Food Hub program is a sales and procurement nonprofit wholesale local food hub. We don't own any of our freight infrastructure. We contract that out to a separate nonprofit distributor that's located in Hardwick, Vermont, called CAE Farm Connects. Our office is located in Newport, Vermont. As you saw on that map, we're nestled right up next to the Canadian border in very northern Vermont. And our warehouse is in Hardwick, which is in the southern end of the Vermont's Northeast Kingdom, which is the term that we use for the 3 counties that are in the northeast corner of the state of Vermont that are historically underserved, low population, and historically low income. So we partner with 50 farms and producers. Most of them are based in Vermont. A couple of them are outside of the borders of Vermont, which we'll get into later. Some of the challenges associated with that. And our customer base consists of not only schools and educational early childhood centers, but also some colleges, hospitals, as well as retail wholesale customers. So we sort of split our sales between our institutional wholesale customers and our retail wholesale customers. Next slide, please. So what was LFS implementation like for Farm Direct? So we were assigned 26 supervisory unions, which is kind of like Vermont lingo for school districts. Other folks have used the term SFAs, all means the same thing. So those 26 SUs included for us over 110 individual schools. 16 of those districts we did have existing sales relationships with in some capacity, and 10 of them were brand new to us. So as others have said, one of the benefits of this program is that it allows us to, it sort of forces us to expand our horizons and make sure that we do have delivery infrastructure that reaches every single SFA in the state. And so after this program is done and this funding is dried up, we can say that we do have the ability to deliver to every single SU in the state with all forces combined of all 4 food hubs. So every single one of those 26 SUs we did have one-on-one onboarding meetings with myself as the account manager to not only make sure they understood all the intricacies of this program, because there are a lot of details for them to understand before they start ordering, as well as so that our distribution partner can understand the best way to make sure that they can expand routes efficiently and make sure that the drops made sense, the timing made sense, the delivery day made sense. So we were assigned $123,232, and so far a little over 75,000 has been spent. 61, we're right on track with Food Connects. That's cool to see. So 19 socially disadvantaged producers have been supported so far, and 30 small businesses have been supported. Next slide, please. So here is a little glimpse into how we were able to leverage our technology to make sure that folks ordering using LFS funds were ordering within allowable products. So you saw how Food Connects handled that. We use Local Food Marketplace. Some of you might recognize this software. So we were able to create a specific product list that had a unique link that we were able to use during the onboarding process to make sure folks knew where to go to make sure that they were ordering the correct products. And of course, there was a learning curve. Of course, it took a long time for everybody to understand the rules and restrictions and make sure that they were using the funding appropriately. But this was how we were able to use our website to give them the best start possible. Next slide. So given the allowable versus unallowable definition, things got interesting with invoicing. We didn't have the privilege of providing credits the way Food Connects did. We did things a little bit differently. So these two invoices that you see on your screen represent one order. So the school placed an order that included the apples, the kale, and the carrots that you see on the other invoice. But those carrots were grown in Canada, so they did not count for the LFS funding. So those had to be pulled off onto another account, onto another invoice. And then, as you can see, the one on the left has the orders paid in full. And there's a note very prominently says Local Food for Schools funds. Just that was sent to schools just for their records to make sure that they're keeping track of their purchases. And for that double dip that they do for the local purchasing incentive, they need to make sure they're tracking those purchases with the dollar amounts. And then for their paid invoice, same order, different account because it has different billing information attached to it. And then that was sent as a regular invoice. So that is just a preview of all of the admin that happens with every single LFS order. And big shout out to Maggie at Green Mountain Farm Direct for handling all of that. Next slide, please. So benefits and successes that came from this program. So of course, with an infusion of funding like this, we see a huge benefit to our sales. We can see that our sales are 41% higher in this school year so far than they were in the whole of last school year. So that's a huge jump in sales, but that all of those sales go directly to our producer partners. As a nonprofit, we, all of our sales go straight to our producers and to freight. And 92 of our total active school accounts, 41% of those were brand new school accounts this year. So we're seeing things grow in a significant way. And of course, that means a benefit to our producer partners. As Tom mentioned, it's really exciting to see schools take advantage of some more boutique products that they wouldn't necessarily be able to order under their normal budget. They're ordering some pickles, they're ordering some high-end grass-fed ground beef. They're ordering some cheese curds. They're ordering some really exciting produce. And our producers that offer bulk quantities of their products have seen that those bulk options specifically skyrocket in sales. So that is definitely a good thing, but then there's also a flip side of that, which is that sudden sales increases, especially of these pack sizes, have posed challenges of supply because we work with a lot of small food businesses that can't necessarily keep up with a sudden increase with no warning. And we've seen that happen here and there, and we hate to cancel orders, but sometimes we've had to do that. And we've also seen Some of our new accounts continue to order after they've used up their funding, which is really exciting to see, and the whole point of this program. Next slide. Some of the challenges we've noticed is that our definition of local has been challenging because, as Gina mentioned, within this program, local is defined as 400 miles from the end user. And since we're right up against Canada, we can't go 400 miles north. We can't even go 50 miles north. So we're going 400 miles south, east, and west only. And it's unfortunate for us to have to cancel orders of Quebec-grown produce because that to us is local produce. And the allowable versus unallowable restrictions we struggled with a lot. We didn't quite understand why bread with majority local ingredients was not allowable. Meanwhile, tortillas were. Same with the yogurt and frozen yogurt, same exact ingredients. One of them's frozen. I just felt like the food was being policed a little bit more than it needed to. Accommodating delivery needs in rural areas was, of course, a challenge, which we started slow and then added on stops. We went at our own pace, and that sort of worked well for us. And of course, the administrative burden, as others have mentioned, the USDA did not allow admin overhead, and there has been a huge amount of admin time dedicated to this program within our food hub that has not been compensated, and that's been a huge challenge for us. Next slide. A little bit about food service management companies. Just wanted to touch on this because this was something that we talked a lot about when we were first figuring out how we were going to implement this program, because we got some resistance from these for-profit food service management companies that we work with as food hubs. Some of the paperwork was too much for them to handle. So Vermont Agency of Agriculture provided two options for them to choose from. One of them was that these LFS-free food orders would replace contracted meal service, which would be the normal option. They would provide a credit on their monthly invoice. But then they had a second option, which was to supplement their contracted meal service, just do some extra menu items, salad bar items, pizza toppings that are not within the contracted meal service, which then means they do not need a credit. We had some challenges here and there with the food service management companies. We found that they were a little bit more restrictive about what they allowed their employees to purchase, and their sort of like top-down management style was different from the self-op schools that we worked with. But we got there in the end. Next slide, please. A little bit about working in rural areas. So we expanded our routes significantly to accommodate all the new stops that we needed to for this program. And it took time, and it took a lot of conversations, and we did the best we could while balancing two priorities, which were that our nonprofit distributor wanted to be very mindful and intentional about creating efficiencies on routes. And then also we wanted to make things as convenient as possible for schools. So it just took a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversations. And not everybody was happy with the drop shipments that we set up. In one case, we were not able to drop to a school. It was very far north. So we ended up dropping at a store that was sort of close to the school because the manager's husband knew the store manager. So it was just one of those small world things that ended up working out well. And of course, relationships with the school staff were more important than ever during this process. Next slide. My last slide. So our suggestions for program improvement. So expand the allowable food definition to be more inclusive. In my mind, as long as it's local, it doesn't matter what the food is. That's the name of the program, right? Like local food for schools. As long as it's local and it's going to schools, that should be enough. Including an onboarding period before the funding actually releases would be hugely helpful. Not only for us as the food hubs, communicating with our distribution folks and with our customers, but also for our producers so that they understand what's coming. They can plan a little bit more with their production, growing season, et cetera. Of course, including administrative overhead. We're hitting this nail over the head a lot, but this is the hugest piece of feedback that we could possibly give, is that we should be paid for our work. and align local definition to fit with other state-specific definitions. Others have said this. We'd love to see the local definition not be a mileage-based thing, but only to align mirror what we see as our local definition by state. And that's it for me.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you all. Great presentation. You got some kudos in the chat, and we don't have as much time for a Q&A, which always happens, but I will say if you have questions, I have a bunch of questions, put them in the chat. If we don't get to them, I can't promise that everyone on this call will answer, but I can share all of your questions with the presenters here and try to get back to you. And we can send out all of the questions and everything in the chat with everybody here in the registrants. So don't feel too bad, and please share your thoughts. So I'm going to highlight Gina and our Food Hub partners, but I'll start off with a question, and anyone can take this, from Melina. Were there any requirements around setting price, or was that completely up to the Food Hub? And then I'm going to kind of double part that with, and I asked this in a prep call, but could some of that admin time be rolled into that price, into that margin? What are your responses to sort of those two questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So yes, so in our application to USDA, we had budgeted that we expected that about 80%, I'm unmuted, okay, good. That about 80% of the cost of the food, that's like the price that's charged to the consumer, ends up going to the producer, and about 20% is like the standard amount for Food Hub overhead. And that was an approximation. And so it was up to the Food Hubs to set a price that worked for them and likely is in alignment with what they're charging for those products outside of the LFS program as well, just to make things transparent. So yeah, no requirements around price. And yes, I think that was the general expectation, like you said, Cassandra, is that some of that administration could be covered by the costs of just the standard markup that Food Hubs are doing. But I think this program did require a particular amount of education and tracking that is unique to like the standard sales that you'd be marking up a product on. So I think there was a gap there as a result.
Great. Thanks, Gina. Anyone else want to respond to that, or should we move to the next question? Okay. This might also be for Gina, which is, what rationale did your agency use to offer this sub-award agreement to Food Hubs specifically? And how did other competitors like small distributors respond to being excluded?
Yeah, I saw this question in the chat as well. It's a great one. And there was an answer from Stephanie Pike in Rhode Island. And the justification for Vermont is similar. So essentially, Food Hubs were identified because they were uniquely in a position to source, identify their products, to provide this education and training, as well as conducting the sales. And also, Food Hubs are working with smaller businesses as well versus broadline distributors that might be harder to access for small businesses. So it felt most aligned with the LFS program objectives in that regard as well. And no, we did not hear from anyone who felt excluded. Yeah, that's my answer to that question.
Great. Thanks for that. Sorry, there's so many great questions in the chat. Yeah, I also have this question I'm going to share. Did you hear any pushback from individual producers who are not part of Food Hubs for feeling like they're cut out of funds? And also, definitely any of the Food Hub partners, have you heard from producers who you might not be working with, who now work with you because of this program?
I'll just say I have not heard from individual producers that have been cut out But I'm curious to hear from the food hubs if there were new relationships built with farms as a result of the LFS sales increase.
That's a really interesting question. No, we didn't experience any farms and producers that we didn't work with expressing discontent that they weren't working with us because of this program, but we did see a lot of our relationships with our current producers strengthened because of it. And we saw some interest, their interest was piqued. Like, why are our sales so high all of a sudden? They didn't know the program was being implemented. They didn't necessarily see it coming. So there were some questions, but it was all positive.
I feel like this webinar is cursed with audio. Becca, I heard you, but there was a lot of static for some reason. But
Oh no.
Okay, that's bad.
Should I repeat what I said?
I think I got it.
Okay.
It's in the chat if you didn't, maybe let us know, and Becca can type a response. Just another clarification question. Was there a competitive application process that went out to food hubs, like an RFA or something like that?
No, it was not. These 4 food hubs were identified back before this wasn't part of the application that the agency submitted to USDA to utilize these funds in 2022, and there was not a competitive process for that.
Great. Quick question. Was protein included in this program? I think it is.
Yes.
Is there a central website that lists all the food hubs in Vermont? Or maybe just part of this program? I'm not sure about that question.
So we do have the food hubs are all listed on the LFS web page, and then there's a USDA tool that tells you where all the food hubs in the US are. I'm not entirely sure how up to date that is, but if I find that link, I can drop it in the chat as well.
Great. There's a question, I know the answer, but I'm going to read it. Was there any training done with kitchen staff in preparation of more fresh foods? Were there any new equipment or infrastructure as part of this program that schools could access?
No, this could only be used to buy local food, but the Agency of Ag does have other grant programs like the Farm to School and Early Childhood Grant Program that I mentioned in my presentation. And that in Vermont, yes, there is funding available for that. And there might be other farm to school programs in different states that could support gardens and kitchen equipment and so on.
Yes.
I would just say that our staff, when we drop, we're a smaller food hub, and so some of our staff take turns delivering things, and one of our delivery people is also does recipes and has cooked in schools and does a variety of things, and actually another one of our drivers too. When the one in particular, I think the school was getting some kale, and they're like, "Oh, what do we do with this?" And so they gave them some ideas and some suggestions as to what they might do. So, and I think we've realized that there is certainly an opportunity there to educate and to try to suggest, and especially seasonally as more things are available, to try to help them figure out what to do with it. So.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that experience. I think there's definitely some synergy between grants for kitchen equipment and infrastructure and Harvest of the Month and all of those educational things, in addition to, funds for local foods. It's not just money for foods will solve everything. There's a lot more systems in place. So we had a question about whether pickles were involved and what the definition of minimally processed looked like. I think I saw pickles maybe on Food Connect's invoice. So Patrick, do you want to maybe tackle that?
Yes, so that would meet the requirement, and is a great example of a product that a school might not bring in a local pickle, especially to supplement their meals. Yeah, it's a great example. I think it was on Becca's presentation, but yes, it was. Tom mentioned kimchi and cheese curds as our two like highlight items that a food service director brought in, and they're exciting to have in your meal for the students and for everyone involved.
Great. Yeah, thanks for responding to that. Let's see. We had some back and forth with Lauren, who tried to respond to a question, and this will be the last question, and then we'll wrap up. Did you work with Vermont Department of Education to develop agreements about allocations? How did the fund management work with the hubs? Did they submit reimbursements to the Department of Ag?
Yes. So we did work with the Department of Education to do the allocations because they have the enrollment data. So that helped us determine how much funding should be made available to each SFA in Vermont. Department of Education also supported us when there were questions that came up around food service management companies. And yes, the grant, the money moved by food hubs requesting an invoice or submitting an invoice to the Agency of Agriculture that the Agency of Agriculture then paid. So the schools didn't deal with any of the money. And there was another question in there: were schools required to conduct procurement on the LFS food? And the answer to that is no as well, because they didn't actually use any money to buy the food, but they were given documentation about how much was spent down so they could keep track of on their own accord of like how much LFS funds they had left available, but procurement was not required.
Great. Yeah, that's a big question. So thanks for addressing that. Also, thank you to everybody who came, who asked all of those questions. Thank you to each of our presenters and all of the Food Hub partners for all of your work, both on the ground and in this moment. It couldn't be done without Food Hub partners like you to make that vital connection between producer and buyer. So really can't thank you enough. And thanks for this inspirational overview of your program. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cassandra.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye.